Hi everybody, welcome back. This is part 39 of our Trumpeter Hood build. In this part, which I think will be quite a short part, as I explained back in part 38 last week, I don't have a lot of time this week. I'm out for at least 3 days. So I just don't want to set myself a big target this week. And what I'm intending to do is to get the anchor gear sorted out. So the hawsepipe entrances, the anchorways and possibly the capstans as well, but we'll see how we go with that. I also will fit the vents and trunking parts that I built last week, or I prepared last week from the Trumpeter parts. They're already painted. I did those in part 38, but I just need to fit them now to the B-barbette and the front of the bridge area as well. So a short week this week, so we better get straight on with it, over to the bench and work out what parts we need to do this part for the anchor gear. So for this part of the build, we're going to be going back more or less to the beginning of the instructions. This is page 1, where we've got all the details of the anchor gear that we're going to be building in this episode. So we've got the hose pipes here. These are resin parts and they go right back to probably part 2 or 3 where I drilled and cut out the hawsepipe holes, so we've got a through hole to the exits where the anchors lie. So I prepared one of these hawsepipes for that use, just so we could measure up. So I cut this off the casting block just to work out the hole that I needed to make in the Trumpeter deck. You can see this one's got the casting block on it. So we'll have to prepare the other 2 of those. The starboard hawsepipe was a blank. There were only the 2 forward anchors fitted by 1941. So this is a blank which will fit a grating to later on. But these 2 were live and didn't have gratings. So you can see back here the actual capstan gear for these is present, but the blank one here just has this resin casting as a blank for what used to be the capstan top for the 3rd anchor. So we'll prepare all the slipways, which are these parts. These have been off the fret for a long time now, and I was getting a bit worried that I was going to damage them, so I'll be glad to get them on the model. And I'll also fit the 2 sizes of bits. We've got a large one and a medium one here, but while we're at the bits, I'll also make the small ones as well. There's some 4 sets of very small bits to build as well, so I'll do those all at the same time and paint them black. I'll also build the fire valve, which is this part here, and there are 2 wildcats which were the mechanisms for the rear of the capstans. So that will be enough for this week, just for the couple of days that I've got in the shed, and we'll get on, we'll get these parts prepared and let's see if we can get them fitted. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the bits made up and mounted on a board ready to paint black. This is the last of the large bits, and I made that last week. I just forgot to paint it for some reason. It didn't go on the card with the other ones. We just have one medium bit, which is this base plate here, and just the 2 bollard parts for that. And we just have to be careful with these. They look very similar. The medium one looks very similar to the small one. So it's just a case of being careful to count the parts properly. And we have 4 of the small bits as well. For these small bits, the fit of the actual bollard part onto the base plate is quite tight really, so it's possible just to assemble these dry just like so, and once they're in position I'm just going to use a spot of super thin super glue underneath. So that's all the bits. I call them bollards actually, but the instructions describe them as bits. Anyway, whatever they are, they're all done. So they can just be primed and we'll paint those black. Next, we'll put this fire valve together. The instructions for this are on page 2. So it's this contraption here. And there's a photograph of the completed assembly here. So we need a couple of resin parts, but the rest is all etched brass. We start off with the main body being part 1100. There are some wheels to go on this, 4 wheels, but I'm going to leave them on the fret. It's these parts here, but I'll leave them on the fret. I don't want to lose them. I'm sure I will lose them if I take them off at this stage. So let's, first thing to do, fold this fire valve up. I think actually this might have been better as a resin part. It's pretty small really to be folding up like this. I think I will just put a dab of solder in there just to stop it springing apart. Now onto the top of that we've got these that are meant to be resin part 23. They actually just look like blobs to me. They don't have any definition really to them. I think I might just have a look in the spares box and see if I've got anything that will do a better job than those resin parts. So what I've found in the spares box are these 2 aerials from a car kit. So they're much more symmetrical, they're both obviously the same, whereas these resin parts were nothing really. So I'm going to be using these. What I'll have to do is just snip the top off to take the actual wheel that goes on top. And there's also these brackets here which we just slide underneath. I'll get a bit of glue on that while it's in the right place. If you're looking at that and thinking, well, I can't really see it, I've got news for you. Neither can I. I just want to snip those stems off now, and then we can fit the wheels to the top, and the other 2 wheels go on the end of these pins here. It's a bit of a test of the old eyesight, is that. Okay, so the fire valve is this part, and it's all finished now. And we don't have any footage of the build after folding it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that it was too small to film. It's very tiny. And the other reason is that it's so hot in the shed that my camera overheated and shut itself down. So I don't have any footage of attaching the wheels and so on, which may be just as well because there was quite a few swear words going on when I was trying to do that. But anyway, there we are, it's finished. The next thing I'm going to do is build the other of these. These are wildcats, and they attach to the rear of the capstans. I'm not absolutely certain what the function is of them. There were maybe brakes or something like that, or they may have initiated the drawing of the anchor, but they're easy enough to make. I can do the other one on camera. So it first of all consists of 3 plates which just glue together. The outer plates have a fold at the bottom to make a little bit of a pedestal. So we fold those plates over first of all. And then I just want to tack the 3 plates together. So those are the 3 plates joined up. I then just want to run along the bottom of the mounting plate with a bit of solder just to seal the bottom up, make sure it doesn't come apart. And on the other one that I did, I just drilled through just to make sure that the hole here was straight the way through. So just like that, just helps the little brass part fit properly. So we have this axis here which just goes through the face. At the end of this pin we fit this bracket which has a couple of folds. It's basically a Z shape. I made that first bend the wrong way around, so I just hope that it doesn't snap off. Actually, unusually, Pontos provide us with a spare set for these wildcats, although we only do need 2 for the model. But that's okay, we got away with that. It has broken off, so I'll have to use the spare. The last thing, having got that bracket in place, we just need to fit the wheel now, which goes on top of this pivot at the top. There we are. Do the capstans now. All that we need to do with these is to remove them from the block. These are resin, and just glue them down onto a brass base. So I'm just going to use one of these very fine razor saws. Ideally, I should be doing this with a mask on, but I'm just being very careful with it and not creating a lot of dust, if any. Otherwise with resin you don't want to be breathing the resin dust. I just want to be careful not to break off any of the little feet on this. This Pontos resin is very, very brittle, very easy to break. I just flatten the bottom of that off just so that it sits nice and flat on the base disc. So it fits onto this base, which as you can see has this little cross on it to show us where the part needs to locate. So all I'm going to do is just put some medium super glue just in the middle. I don't want to put any along the legs. Don't want to risk getting the glue everywhere, and just stand it on its base. Next, the main bow capstan, which again is this resin part, and we have a few pieces to add to the top of this. We'll take it off the block first. I don't want to be gluing the etched parts on and then sewing it, because probably the etched brass won't stay on. So it is off its block, and again just make sure that the bottom's flat. We then fit these 4 discs to the top of the capstan. Starting with the solid one. And then we have this pair, which will give the hollow effect to the inside. And we just need to make sure that the teeth, if that's what you want to call them, lay over the top of each other. And then finally we have a solid top. Which is this part, and it has some bolt detail on top of it. So from the side we've got the openings in the capstan around the edge. So that looks nice. There are some trumpeter parts as well that we need, which are these two E20. They receive the anchor chain having gone round the capstans here and down into the machinery below. There's a tiny bit of flash just on the inside of those. The last thing to do is to prepare this plate which sits between the anchor chains, and it has these eye bolts in it, so 6 of these little eye bolts. And there's an error in the trumpeter instructions. It calls out 916 for this part, and it's actually 907. So here are all the parts that we need for this step. I've cut out the 4 capstan rollers here. They're in turned brass. We've got the 3 main slipways for the anchor chains, which have some nice plate detail etched into them. So they're nice. The trumpeter plastic openings for the anchor chains, so that they go down into the anchor chain locker on the deck below. Two styles of capstan. One which simply has the brass plate, and the other one slightly more complicated, a bit more elaborate, with the three brass discs which give us this open appearance to the capstan. We have a pair of wildcats which fit just behind the capstans themselves. We've got the little fire valve, which I didn't get on camera because the camera overheated earlier on. It's been that warm in the shed, so that was a case of folding the part up, the main body, and attaching these four little wheels. I replaced the resin stems that we get in the Pontos set with some plastic. Actually, they were car aerials from a spare car kit. And the last thing is this plate here, which has some tie-down bolts fitted to it. They're just glued into place. So that's all the parts that we need. We also have the bollards that I've made up now. That's all the bollards for the ship finished. Two of which, the last large one and the single medium bollard, will be fitted as this part of the build, but I've made the small ones just so that I can get them all painted at the same time. So I'll get all those parts primed, we can get them painted and go over to the model and get them fitted. I've primed these hose pipe openings. These are the resin parts. But I'd forgotten that we have these edgings, these flanges that the hose pipes fit into. I'd forgotten that we had those. So I'm going to fit those before painting, I think, so that I can make sure that the hose pipe is absolutely central in those bands. They add a bit of rivet detail or bolt detail around the edges. The other thing that Pontos provide are these three gratings, which are designed for the hosepipe openings, but if you're building the model in 1941, there was only the one grating fitted, which was to the redundant third anchor. So we don't need all three of those. They're all identical, so it doesn't matter which one we choose, but just fit the one to the third anchor on the forecastle deck. These are really pretty tricky to get lined up properly, but what I've ended up doing with them is just apply some medium super glue to the underside of this tail piece here, and then that just allows you to locate the ring onto the back where it's going to be hidden anyway. And that just lets you line everything up. You just want a consistent spacing all the way around these parts. So that's nicely lined up. And I'll just use some thin super glue on the underside and a quick spray with some accelerator straight away to make sure that it's located properly. So this so that stops it moving around, and that's quite firm. We just need to put a little drop at the front. so that's it's probably the best of the three. So I've got two good ones which I'm going to use for the open hose pipes, and then there's one which is a bit scruffier, which is this one. I had a bit of trouble with that, so I'm going to use that one to cover up with the grating. I'll fit the grating separately because when we get these hose pipes in, they're going to need just a little bit of filler on the inside to blend them in with the hole that we drilled through way back in probably part 2. Okay, so they're all primed, ready to paint. That's the last of the parts all ready for painting. But I remember saying way back in part 2 or maybe 3, when I was painting the hull, that I mixed up 80 millilitres of paint. So 8 of these bottles, these Tamiya lacquer paint bottles, and I thought that'd be plenty, but actually I've had to mix another batch of 80 mils, and that has just run out, so I've got another one to make up. So this third and last batch will definitely do the job on the hood, and I'll have to save it for a future build. But that's an awful lot of paint to be using. I've probably getting on for 200 millilitres of paint on this particular model. So I'll mix the next batch up. I'll use a clean bottle for that, just in case that's got any bits of debris in it. I don't want that going through the airbrush. So that's done its job. But we'll mix the colours up. I'll just have to check back to that part to remember exactly what combination we used. Okay, so that's a new batch made up. So as I say, the third batch of Home Fleet Dark Grey that I've made up. The way I do that is I will use the paint stirrer. I've got an electric paint stirrer to mix the paint initially, pour it into the main jar, then I'll add a pipette full of Tamiya's lacquer thinner, the retarder type lacquer thinner, into the jar just to pick up the remnants. Give that another mix, and that thinned down paint, just make sure you clean the bottle out. It gets all the paint out. This is quite expensive stuff. You don't want to leave quite a bit in the bottle, so the thinner just cleans the paint bottle out. And the other thing it does is it, as we go along, it thins the main colour, probably by 20%, and then I'll thin paint as I'm coming to use it. So that's the method, and in the end I've used the same mix. I had to look back at, it was actually part 6 when I painted the hull and first mixed up this shade of Home Fleet Dark Grey. So I had to refer back to make sure that I'd got the right combinations again, and mixed another batch up. That will certainly do the rest of the ship. There's very little else to do now. What I also did was I've saved the remnants from the second batch and thinned it down a little bit. There's probably about 3 or 4 millilitres of that second batch, and I wanted to preserve that because I've got to touch in the rear screens on the ship, which were originally painted in this second batch grey. So there's just enough in there to just touch those rear screens up where I've done that filling work on the aft bulkhead, and it just means that I'm not going to have to repaint the whole screen again, because this will be very slightly different just because of the blue mix in it. It's very difficult to match the blue up precisely, but that's why I wanted to just save the last of that second batch. Now, just to test this, you'll notice that I've had this turret knocking about on the model for 2 or 3 months now, and this is just a test piece really. Trumpeter provide 6 turrets I think in the kit, and that's just because of moulding restrictions. And I've used this turret, it's been on the model for quite a while now, but I've used it just to match up the previous paint. So this is the old batch of Home Fleet Dark Grey that I mixed up, and I've just gone in with this new batch along the side here and the reverse face, just to see what sort of match I've managed to get. It's ever so slightly bluer, but it's very difficult to tell the difference. It's probably one of those things that only I and, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 other people will know now. So that's been a useful exercise, keeping that turret. So there we are, we've got a new batch of paint. I can paint all the parts that we've just made up for the forecastle deck and get them fitted to the ship. Okay, so 4 days later I'm back at the model after my little expedition, and I want to get these parts that I made last weekend actually onto the ship now. I've already fitted a couple of the hawsepipe openings, and I've just got this last one to do, and for it I used this MIG ultra glue, and I've checked that all these fit properly. I did have to do a little bit of trimming of these first 2 just to make sure that they fitted snugly down on the deck. They do now, but they're still going to need some filling and smoothing out where the resin fits into the milliput that I fitted right the way back at the beginning of the build before I fitted the decks. So we need to get plenty of glue onto these parts. I didn't put any glue around the tops, doesn't need that. It's just a decent blob of glue on the bottom, and hopefully that should just seat it down. We can check to see if there's any glue on the inside of the hawsepipe, and there is, so that's going to form a bond when the MIG glue goes off. So that's step 1. We have the anchor chain slipways here, if that's what they're properly called. I'm not sure that they are. So they're just tucked underneath the plate at the back of the hawsepipe there. And for these I'm going to use some super glue, although I don't normally like using super glue on decks. I'm just going to use tiny spots down the centre line of the slipway. Using thick super glue on decks is less risky than using thin or extra thin. It doesn't spread out as much, and it doesn't absorb into the wood as far, so there's less danger of getting stain marks as the glue spreads. And obviously we get one chance at this. Pontos do provide some little markings on the deck just to help us. The redundant anchor has this base plate which we need to glue on. This is the resin part that Pontos provided. My example of this part was quite badly cast. It had a very large air bubble in the middle, and that meant that I had to use successive layers of filler to close that hole up. but it looks fine now. It needed quite a bit of work on it to get it anywhere near presentable. Obviously feeding time for the sheep again. Who said living in the countryside was peaceful? Sheep are some of the noisiest animals I've ever come across. Okay, I'm going to fit the two bollards here. There's a medium one and a large one, but first of all I just need to drill the holes out for them. I'm just going to open the holes up, just drill them out. And although a motor tool at this stage looks as though it's a bit heavy-handed, it's actually a lot safer, I think, than using a hand drill bit. It puts a lot less stress on the model. You're not twisting it about as much as you do with a hand drill in a drill chuck. So I much prefer to use a motor drill at this stage. If I can get in, this brush that I'm using is from Tamiya. It's an anti-static brush, and it's also got a little smaller brush inside just for detail work. I think a lot of people might not realise that that's there actually on these things inside the handle, but the main brush is very delicate. It's not going to damage any of this fine detail, particularly that you find on model warships. So it's a good thing to have. That's the medium. So just the one of those on the entire ship. The next thing I want to do is to fit these, which is where the actual anchor chain goes down into the ship on the deck below, where the chain was stored. And what I want to do is just drill out a hole for the anchor chain to disappear down into. At the minute you can see the deck is solid, so we're going to have a strange position of having the chain just disappearing into that chamber with nowhere to go, which I don't want. So I'm just going to drill a small hole for the chain to go down into. Now interestingly, when I've done that, I've noticed that the deck has got a piece to come out. It appears to have a cutout, and I think that whole thing will pull away, which it does. So I'm not going to need to do any drilling. The hole is already in the Trumpeter deck. It's just that I didn't spot that Pontos had made that cutout in the wooden deck. So that's a big help. These openings don't go fore and aft. They're obviously angled slightly inwards towards the position of the capstan. They're quite a tight fit into the holes that Trumpeter provide in the deck. So I just had to use this wooden It's actually a coffee stirrer just to push it down, so I didn't scratch it. Didn't want to use anything metal for that. Okay, I'll fit the capstans themselves. Pontos provide these 4 turned brass parts, which are the capstan rollers. And this main capstan goes in the middle. Right, I want to fit these wildcats now. These are the control wheels that fit behind the capstans. Okay, so that's the wildcats. There's a tie-down plate to fit here at the front. The last of these small parts that I have to fit is the fire valve. I mentioned earlier about the noise outside with the sheep, and a thought just occurred to me, and I've taken a look out the window, and it's as I suspected. They've all been through the shearing sheds. When they lose the fleece, they forget who everyone is, because they identify each other as well as through the calls. They identify each other through the scent on the fleeces. So of course when they're shorn, they lose a lot of the memory for who everyone is. So they spend a couple of days making a right old racket, getting to know each other again. And that's what they're doing just at the moment, I'm afraid. So there we are, they're just proving it to you. Right, I can fit the rest of the vents now around the B-barbette and the front of the bridge here. And to glue these, I use some of the MIG ultra glue, just putting a bit at the bottom and a bit at the top where the flange meets the structure. Okay, so that's all we've got time for, I think, this week. It's what we set out to do at the beginning of the week, but as you know, I've had a short week this week. I've got the hose pipes done, the anchor chain slipways, that's what I call them anyway, finished. All the bits of equipment around the capstans done, and we've finished all the vents off as well around the forward part of the ship, around the B turret and on the forward part of the superstructure. So it's the amount of progress that I expected to make and I wanted to make this week. Okay, so that's it for this particular episode. Next week in part 40, I'll finish off the forecastle deck, hopefully, get the hatches done, all the mushroom vents, and I want to make a start on the breakwaters as well. May get them finished, I don't know. I'm not certain whether or not we'll have enough time for that, but that'll be the aim, to get the forecastle deck done next week. So that'll be coming up in part 40, as I said, and that'll be the usual time next Friday. 8 o'clock will premiere. So that's it for part 39. I'll see you next time for part 40 for all of that forecastle work. So in the meantime, stay safe everybody, look after yourselves, enjoy your modelling if that's what you're doing, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.